June 2026. Somewhere in the Sahara Desert, a truck stopped moving. At first, it wasn't an emergency. Vehicles break down all the time. A repair, a delay, a few lost hours. Nothing unusual. But this truck wasn't parked beside a road. It wasn't near a town. It wasn't even near a well. It was stranded in one of the most isolated regions on Earth. Inside were dozens of people returning home. Workers traveling back from the goldfields of Mali. Then something went wrong. The engine failed. The repairs failed. And slowly, something far more dangerous began to fail. Time. Days later, authorities would discover the scene. 49 people dead. 2 survivors remained. They had walked more than 50 kilometers through the Sahara to find help. When news of the tragedy spread, the details sounded almost unbelievable. This wasn't the 19th century. This wasn't the age of caravans. This happened in 2026, an era of satellites, GPS, smartphones, an age in which nearly every corner of the planet can be viewed from space. So how does something like this still happen? How can a broken vehicle become a death sentence in the modern world? The answer lies in a much larger story, one stretching back thousands of years. A story of lost caravans, missing travelers, forgotten settlements, ancient rivers, and one place that seems to ignore every attempt to tame it. This is the story of the Sahara, the desert that still makes people vanish. For the people inside the truck, the journey should have been routine. Every year, thousands of workers travel between the goldfields of Mali and the villages of neighboring Niger. The work is difficult. The conditions are harsh, but the route itself is familiar. In late May of 2026, dozens of Nigerian workers began the trip home. Many had spent months working in informal gold mining sites deep inside Mali. Now a religious holiday was approaching, Eid al-Adha, a chance to return home, see family, celebrate, rest. Somewhere near the Malian settlement of Tel Handak, they boarded a cargo truck heading north. The destination was Niger, the border town of Asamaka, then home. At first, everything appeared normal. The truck pushed through desert tracks that connect some of the most remote corners of the Sahara. No highways, no service stations, no emergency phones, no towns appearing every few miles. Just scattered routes etched into a landscape so large that, from space, many seemed to disappear entirely. Then the truck broke down. Exactly what failed remains unclear. What is known is that the vehicle stopped. The driver tried to repair it. His apprentice tried. Passengers joined in. Nothing worked. The engine stayed silent. And suddenly a journey became a waiting game. At first there was probably optimism. Someone would come along. Another vehicle. Another convoy. Another traveler. But the Sahara doesn't operate on schedules. Hours became a day, then another. Water supplies began to shrink. The sun climbed higher. The temperature approached 48 degrees Celsius. Around them stretched more than 9 million square kilometers of desert. No villages, no wells, no rescue teams overhead. As conditions worsened, the passengers faced an impossible choice: stay or walk. Most stayed. 2 men left and walking toward Asamaka, not because they knew exactly where it was, but because doing nothing guaranteed death. Step after step, they crossed terrain that seemed endless: rock, gravel, heat, shimmering above the ground. No signs, no roads, no certainty, only hope. More than 50 kilometers later, they reached help. When authorities finally returned to the site, the outcome was devastating. 49 people dead, 1 woman, 48 men, all Nigerian nationals. Most had been trying to get home. The bodies were discovered more than 80 kilometers west of Asamaka, and so remote that many of the victims had to be buried there, in the desert itself. The story briefly appeared in headlines around the world. Then, like most stories from the Sahara, it faded. But there was something unsettling about the tragedy. Not simply the number of victims, not even the circumstances. It was the fact that this wasn't unusual. Because if you look closely at the Sahara, you begin to notice a pattern. Trucks break down, convoys vanish, travelers disappear, bodies are discovered months later, sometimes years later, and sometimes never. The 49 victims of 2026 were not the first people swallowed by the Sahara, not even close. When most people picture the Sahara, they imagine the same image. Endless sand dunes, golden waves stretching to the horizon, A landscape that looks almost identical in every direction. Hollywood loves that version of the Sahara. Travel brochures love it too. The problem is that much of it isn't true. In reality, some travelers can cross hundreds of kilometers of the Sahara and barely see a single major dune field, because most of the desert isn't sand. It's stone, rock, gravel, plateaus, mountains, and vast empty spaces that seem to exist outside normal human scale. The Sahara covers roughly 9.2 million square kilometers. That number is so large it's almost meaningless. So let's shrink it. The Sahara is nearly the size of the entire United States. It's only slightly smaller than Europe. It stretches across 11 countries. From the Atlantic Ocean in the west to the Red Sea in the east, a journey across it can take days by aircraft, weeks by vehicle, months on foot. Yet despite its size, only a tiny number of people live within it. Large sections are effectively empty. Not empty in the way a rural town is empty. Empty in the sense that a person could travel for hours without seeing another human being, sometimes days. And that's where the real misunderstanding begins. Because getting lost in the Sahara is not like getting lost in a forest. A forest surrounds you. A mountain range guides you. A coastline gives you direction. The Sahara often offers none of those things, only distance. The desert's most famous landmarks aren't dunes, they're mountains. The towering Tibesti Mountains rise from northern Chad like an island emerging from an ocean. Hundreds of kilometers away stand the volcanic peaks of the Ahagar Mountains in Algeria. In Niger, the Air Mountains erupt unexpectedly from the surrounding plains. Some rise more than 3,000 meters above sea level, enough to hold snow during colder periods of history. Then there are the Hamadas, immense rocky plateaus covered in fractured stone. Some stretch so far that they appear frozen in time. No vegetation, no movement, no sign that life was ever there. Pilots flying above them often compare the view to another planet. And then come the salt flats, white horizons where earth and sky seem to merge together. Places where depth becomes difficult to judge, where distances become deceptive, where travelers can spend hours moving toward something that never appears to get closer. Even from space, parts of the Sahara feel strangely featureless. And that's important, because navigation depends on reference points. The human brain is constantly building maps. A mountain, a river, a road, a tree, something. Take enough of those away and orientation begins to break down. The Sahara removes almost all of them, which is why experienced travelers often describe a strange psychological effect. Not fear, not panic, something more subtle. The feeling that direction itself is becoming uncertain, that north, south, east, and west are slowly losing meaning. For centuries, survival here depended on knowing a handful of routes, a few wells, a few landmarks, a few hidden paths passed down through generations. Leave those routes, and the desert changes completely, because the Sahara isn't just difficult to cross, it's difficult to understand. And once you leave the known tracks, something else begins to happen. The desert starts playing tricks on you. The Sahara rarely kills through a single dramatic event. Instead, it creates chains of mistakes. One problem leads to another, then another, until escape becomes almost impossible. Sometimes it starts with a sandstorm. Without warning, walls of dust can rise from the horizon. Within minutes, visibility collapses. Landmarks disappear, tracks vanish, vehicles lose direction, the sky turns orange, then brown, then black. Experienced drivers often stop completely and wait, because moving blind can be worse than staying still. History is filled with stories of caravans scattered by storms, people separated by only a few dozen meters, never seeing each other again. Other times, the problem begins with navigation, not because maps are wrong, because the landscape itself becomes deceptive. In most places, if you're lost, you can climb something. Look around. Find a road, a river, a town. In parts of the Sahara, you can climb a ridge and see exactly the same thing in every direction. Nothing. Just more desert. The farther you travel from established routes, the more dangerous small errors become. A wrong turn of 10 degrees may seem insignificant for an hour, maybe 2. But after hundreds of kilometers, that tiny mistake can place you completely off course, far from wells, far from settlements, far from anyone looking for you. And then there are the vehicles. The Sahara has a habit of turning machines into liabilities. Engines overheat, tires fail, filters clog with dust, batteries die, fuel calculations go wrong. A single mechanical problem can strand people hundreds of kilometers from assistance, which brings us to one of the most unsettling realities of the desert. Many people don't disappear while moving. They disappear while waiting. Waiting beside a vehicle. Waiting for help. Waiting for another traveler. Waiting for a rescue that never arrives. Because the Sahara doesn't need to trap you forever. It only needs to trap you longer than your supplies can last. And when that happens, people face impossible decisions. Stay with the vehicle or leave. Search for help or conserve energy. The wrong choice can be fatal. The problem is that nobody knows which choice is wrong until afterward. By then, it's too late. In 2018, a group of migrants found themselves abandoned in the Sahara. No vehicle, no guide, no reliable sense of direction. Only a horizon that looked exactly the same in every direction. At some point, they spotted what appeared to be water. Relief, a lake, maybe even a settlement. They walked toward it, hour after hour. The water never got closer, because it wasn't there. It was a mirage, one of the oldest tricks in the desert. For thousands of years, travelers have reported seeing entire landscapes that didn't exist. Lakes, palm trees, villages, shimmering pools stretching across the horizon. The phenomenon is completely natural, but knowing that doesn't make it any less dangerous. Because when you're exhausted, frightened, and desperate, your brain doesn't care about atmospheric physics. It sees hope. And hope can send people in exactly the wrong direction. But if modern disappearances are disturbing, what happens deeper inside the Sahara is even harder to comprehend. Because there are routes crossing this desert where people vanish every year. Not dozens, not hundreds, potentially thousands. Most people imagine the Sahara as empty, but in some places it has become one of the busiest migration corridors on Earth. The traffic is just difficult to see. Every year, thousands of people enter the desert hoping to reach North Africa. Some dream of Europe, others are fleeing war. Some are escaping poverty. Some are simply looking for work. Their journeys often begin hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. Nigeria, Sudan, Burkina Faso, Mali, Chad, Niger. Different countries, different stories, but many eventually pass through the same place, Agadez, a city on the southern edge of the Sahara. For centuries, Agadez was a caravan crossroads. Today, it serves a different role. It is one of the main gateways into the desert. From here, travelers head north, toward Libya, toward Algeria, toward uncertainty. And once they leave Agadez, the landscape changes. Roads become tracks. Tracks become faint marks in the sand. Then even those disappear. The journey continues through regions so remote that rescue is often impossible. And that's exactly why smugglers use them. The farther from authorities, the better. Many migrants travel packed into pickup trucks. Some stand for days, others cling to the sides. Water is rationed. Breakdowns are common. And unlike commercial routes, there is no emergency infrastructure. No patrols, no service stations, no guarantee that another vehicle will pass by. For some, the journey ends abruptly. A truck becomes stuck, an engine fails, a smuggler turns back. Or worse, passengers are abandoned. There are documented cases of migrants being left in the desert with little food, little water, and no way to contact help. Some survive, many don't. What makes these deaths particularly disturbing is how little evidence they leave behind. The Sahara is not an ocean. Bodies do not sink beneath the waves. Yet people can still disappear here almost completely. Search areas are enormous. Witnesses are rare. Records are incomplete. Entire groups can vanish without generating international headlines. Sometimes the only clues are scattered belongings. A shoe, a backpack, a water container. Tracks leading toward the horizon. Then nothing. Aid organizations operating in the region have repeatedly warned that the true number of deaths may never be known. The desert simply keeps too many secrets. And unlike disasters that happen in cities or along coastlines, many Sahara deaths occur far from cameras, far from journalists, far from anyone counting. For years, the Mediterranean Sea has been viewed as the great graveyard of migration, the final barrier between Africa and Europe, the place where thousands have lost their lives. But recent investigations revealed something unexpected, something deeply unsettling. Between 2020 and 2024, documented deaths in Sahara crossings were estimated to be roughly double those recorded in the Mediterranean during the same period. Double. Think about that. The world's attention is drawn toward the sea. Meanwhile, far inland, another tragedy unfolds across an area larger than the United States. Largely unseen, largely unreported, and often unrecorded, which means one of the deadliest migration routes on Earth is also one of the least visible, a place where people vanish before they ever reach the coastline, before they ever board a boat, before most of the world even knows they existed. But migration is only one chapter in the Sahara's story, long before smugglers, long before trucks, long before borders. The desert was swallowing people for entirely different reasons. And in a strange twist, it wasn't always a desert at all. If someone had stood in the middle of the Sahara 10,000 years ago, they wouldn't have recognized it. There would be no endless dunes, no barren horizon, no lifeless emptiness stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Instead, they would have seen grasslands, lakes, rivers, animals gathering at the water's edge, and people, lots of people. Today, that sounds impossible. Yet evidence of that lost world is scattered across the Sahara. In caves and on cliff faces, explorers discovered rock art showing hippos, crocodiles, fish, giraffes, and even people swimming in what is now the largest hot desert on Earth. The artists weren't imagining these scenes. They were recording the world around them. Archaeologists later uncovered even more evidence. At Gobero in Niger, researchers found graves, tools, and pottery belonging to communities that lived beside a lake for thousands of years. Satellite imagery revealed traces of ancient rivers buried beneath the sand, former shorelines, dried lake beds, even evidence of Megachad, a prehistoric lake so vast it covered an area larger than many modern countries. The Sahara was not always a desert. It became one, slowly, over thousands of years. Rainfall declined, rivers vanished, lakes disappeared, settlements were abandoned, people moved away, and entire landscapes faded from memory. But the Sahara didn't just swallow rivers and civilizations. It continued swallowing people. For thousands of years, crossing the desert meant accepting a brutal reality. If something went wrong, help wasn't coming. Caravans carrying gold, salt, merchants, and pilgrims crossed these routes for centuries. Some never arrived. One navigation error, one missed well, one sandstorm. That was often enough. Years later, travelers would sometimes find scattered bones, abandoned camps, or the remains of dead camels, the final traces of journeys that never reached their destination, and the pattern continues today. In 2003, 21 European tourists disappeared in southern Algeria, triggering an international search. Most were eventually found, but the incident exposed a disturbing truth. Even in the modern world, people can still vanish in the Sahara. More recently, in 2026, a French tourist named Paul Ferreri walked away from a camp in Chad's Ennedi region. 2 days later, he was found dead, not because he was reckless, because in the Sahara, the margin for error can be terrifyingly small. These are only the cases we know about, the documented ones, the reported ones. Across the desert are stories of abandoned vehicles, forgotten tracks, lost settlements, and people who simply never returned. Some stories are myths, others are not, but they all point toward the same reality. The Sahara remains one of the few places on Earth where a human being can disappear into the landscape itself, which raises an uncomfortable question. If satellites circle the planet, if aircraft can map entire continents, if technology has transformed nearly every corner of the world, why does the Sahara still keep so many secrets? In 2026, the world is watched by satellites. Ships can be tracked across oceans. Aircraft can be monitored in real time. A smartphone can locate you within meters. So why does the Sahara still defeat all of this? Because technology doesn't eliminate isolation, it only reduces it. And few places on Earth are more isolated than the Sahara. When the truck carrying 49 workers broke down in the desert, the challenge wasn't finding the Sahara. The challenge was finding one vehicle inside an area covering more than 9 million square kilometers. Even satellites have limits. A stranded truck is small, dust can reduce visibility, search areas can be enormous, and communication is often fragile. Large parts of the Sahara have little or no network coverage. A phone without signal is useless. A dead battery can turn a minor problem into a survival emergency. And even when rescuers know where someone is, reaching them is another challenge entirely. Distances are measured in hours, sometimes days. A delayed search, a missed checkpoint, a few lost hours, In the Sahara, that's often enough, which is why people still disappear here, not because nobody is looking, because the desert is vast, unforgiving, and constantly changing. Tracks vanish, storms erase evidence, the landscape keeps moving. Yet while technology struggles to find everything the Sahara hides today, it is beginning to reveal what the desert buried long ago. For centuries, the Sahara kept its secrets because nobody could see beneath it. Then we started looking from above, from aircraft, from satellites, from space, and suddenly strange patterns began appearing. Ancient river systems stretching across hundreds of kilometers, buried lake shorelines, forgotten migration routes, evidence of settlements in places once thought impossible to inhabit. The Sahara no longer looked empty. It looked layered, like a record of lost worlds hidden beneath the sand. Every new survey raises new questions. How many ancient settlements remain undiscovered? How many forgotten routes have yet to be mapped? How much of the green Sahara still lies buried beneath the desert? Because despite centuries of exploration, enormous areas remain largely unstudied. And with every discovery, one thing becomes clear. The Sahara is not just a desert, it is one of the largest archives of human and environmental history on Earth. An archive that is still being uncovered. And somewhere beyond the mapped routes, the archaeological sites and the satellite surveys, more secrets are almost certainly waiting. Because for thousands of years, the Sahara has buried rivers, lakes, civilizations, and people. The question is not whether more discoveries remain hidden. The question is how many. In June of 2026, a truck stopped in the Sahara. Nothing about it seemed remarkable. No international crisis. No breaking news coverage that lasted for weeks. No global search effort. Just a mechanical failure on a remote route between Mali and Niger. Then 49 people died, and within days most of the world moved on. The headlines disappeared. The conversations ended. The story faded, but the desert remained. That's the strange thing about the Sahara. For thousands of years, the details have changed. The people have changed. The technology has changed. Yet the story remains remarkably familiar. Once it was camel caravans crossing oceans of stone and sand, merchants carrying gold and salt between distant kingdoms. Some reached their destination. Others never did. Centuries later, explorers arrived with maps, compasses, and scientific instruments. Some returned with extraordinary discoveries. Others vanished into the horizon. Today, vehicles replace caravans. GPS replaces stars. Satellites replace lookout towers. And yet people are still disappearing. Not because the Sahara is frozen in time, but because it operates on a scale that humanity still struggles to comprehend. A place where distance behaves differently. Where mistakes grow larger with every kilometer. Where entire rivers can vanish. Entire civilizations can vanish. And sometimes, entire journeys can vanish too. Perhaps that's why the Sahara continues to fascinate us. Not because it's empty, but because it isn't. Beneath its rocks and dunes are traces of lost worlds, ancient lakes, forgotten settlements, hidden histories, stories that remain unfinished. And while researchers continue uncovering pieces of the past, the desert keeps creating new mysteries. Every year, people cross it. Every year, some don't return. And somewhere beyond the routes, beyond the settlements, beyond the places marked on maps, countless questions remain unanswered. If you enjoy documentaries about hidden places, forgotten history, unexplained events, and the mysteries shaping our world, subscribe and join us for the next journey. Because the real mystery of the Sahara isn't why people disappear there. The real mystery is how much of it still remains unknown.